for me, and I welcome their hatred.
What is up, everybody? This is Hater Radio. My name is Chris McLean. I'm here without a co-host, just me tonight. So it's going to be the solo show, but here we are live. This is not recorded. This is right now at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. So if you want to comment, jump on. I'll be able to respond. So definitely you can respond on Facebook and all the socials that we're on. So YouTube and Twitter as well, Twitter X. So let's jump into it. So week 13, this is the recap show. A lot of big games. It was a really interesting week of games, and there was starting especially on Saturday, Indiana and Ohio State. At the time, it was a number 5 versus number 2 matchup. Indiana goes up 7-0, gets a turnover and downs deep in their territory against Ohio State. So it looked pretty good for Indiana at first, and it was like, oh, things are going well. They were getting stops, and then all of a sudden it like imploded. Ohio State was able to get a touchdown, tie it up, and then on a punt deep in Indiana's territory, the punter dropped the snap, and Ohio State had the ball really close to be able to score quickly, which they did. They took advantage of it. And then later on, Ohio State had a punt return for a touchdown where the punter kind of outkicked the coverage. If he had kicked it a little bit higher, maybe the coverage would have gotten there in time. But regardless, Caleb Downs for Ohio State had a really good return. He's the transfer from Alabama, the safety. And, once it was 21-7 and felt like a pretty insurmountable lead, Ohio State scores again, and it was on from there. They get another field goal. It's 31-7. Indiana gets a late TD to make it a 2-score game with a 2-point conversion, but it was kind of all she wrote. Indiana really couldn't get anything going in between those 2 touchdowns, and that was really what was the problem. Well, obviously, the special teams miscues were huge, pretty much the turning point in the game. But then if Indiana could have put any forth of effort between those 2 touchdowns that they scored, field goals, anything, this game may have been a little bit tighter, but it was, Ohio State pretty much in control most of the second half because they went up pretty quickly in that third quarter, 21-7, and then scored later on in that quarter to make it 28-7. So Ohio State gets the win. I think right now, I didn't look at the scenarios, but I'll look at those for Wednesday. But right now, Ohio State, Penn State, and Indiana all have one loss in the Big Ten. So even if Oregon loses and they all tie, Oregon would have the head-to-head with Ohio State, so they would jump over them. But Ohio State has the head-to-head versus Penn State and Indiana, and neither of those two have a head-to-head with any of them. So if it ends up one loss between all 4 of them, then it's likely that it's Ohio State, Oregon. And then also with if Ohio State were to lose to Michigan or Oregon loses to Washington, throws a lot of chaos into it. I know Penn State has I think they play Maryland, and then Indiana plays Purdue. So, if Indiana and Purdue and Penn State win their games and Oregon and Ohio State lose, it does open the door. I don't think even with one loss, though, Oregon still would probably go over those other ones. But Ohio State, for sure, if they had 2 losses, that would pretty much eliminate them. So, it's definitely a huge win that they need against Michigan, which, I know Michigan's been struggling, but they still have a good defense. So we'll see there. Okay, moving on to Let's see. What's the next game we got? Oh, there's somebody. The third of Franks. I don't know who you are. Go Bulls. Yeah, go Bulls. Indiana's only loss coming from Ohio State should keep them in the CFP, but the SEC bias will likely kick them out. I don't know. I mean, I like Indiana a lot. I think that Indiana, with their whole collective team, they are a very strong team. Obviously, that special team stuff kind of hurts immensely. I didn't realize that was going to be a weakness, but it was also a little bit inclement weather. So if they're going to be playing in a game, in a bowl game, which more than likely it's going to be at um, a closed stadium, but the first game might be in the elements if they have a home playoff game or if they play like an SEC team on the road. But I think at this point, if Indiana wins against Purdue, regardless of what happens getting into the Big Ten championship game or not, I think they get in. I don't see why a one-loss team should not get in. They did beat the two participants in the championship game last year. I like Signetti a lot. I think he's a really good coach. I think he's done immensely well with the talent that he has, which is not that great of talent considering a lot of the guys came from James Madison. And those guys, it's because they've played under his system and they know it so well. So they play as a very cohesive unit. And so that really blended well with the guys that he had and the other transfers that he brought in. I think Indiana has a real good shot of getting in. I really do. I don't think I know this SEC bias stuff. A lot of people are getting really mad about it, but this is the first time we've had to deal with this where we're allowing in more than one or two teams from a conference. So it then gets very subjective and very nitpicky on the arguments. But as of right now, Alabama has 3 losses. Texas A&M has 3 losses, and who else? Ole Miss has 3 losses. So I don't know. I don't think you can eliminate any of those, but I think what's going to happen is probably maybe one of those gets in. Now, right now, it seems like it's Georgia, Texas A&M for the SEC championship game. So Georgia is in definitively, and then the winner of the Texas A&M game goes. So if Texas A&M loses that game, they're out. They're definitely out. They're not going anywhere. But if they win that game and then they go to the SEC championship game and they lose that, I think they're out as well. I don't think they're going to take a 4-loss team. I mean, who knows? But I don't think they will. But then if Georgia were, for instance, to lose, then they would be a 3-loss team as well. So then you would have 4 SEC teams with 3 losses, which would be pretty significant. Then how do you decipher which one is best, considering they all kind of cannibalize each other? So you can't really decipher who is better. I mean, Alabama beat Georgia, Georgia beat Texas, but then Georgia lost to Ole Miss, and then Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. And then, then you have Tennessee, who's not going to the SEC championship game. And if they beat Vanderbilt, they'll have 2 losses. If they beat Vanderbilt, they should get in. That's almost a guarantee. But if they lose to Vanderbilt, they're right there in the mix with the 4 other 3-loss teams. So that would be 5 3-loss SEC teams. That is kind of hard to figure out. Of those 5, how would you decide? Again, Tennessee lost to Georgia, Tennessee lost to Arkansas. So what do you actually figure out there with all those teams? It's a real head scratcher. I don't know. I don't know what's best. I know that these teams are pretty good. Tennessee has decent quarterback play. Carson Beck for Georgia is a pretty good quarterback. Jackson Dart is a pretty good quarterback. So at least those teams have that. Whereas maybe a team like Boise State doesn't necessarily have a good quarterback play, or certain Big 12 teams kind of lacking. Maybe Leavitt isn't as good at Arizona State, but Retzlaff is kind of, I don't know. I don't know what to make of Retzlaff. He throws a lot of picks, which I'm not really happy with BYU. But All right, this is getting too much into the weeds. Let's get more back into the game. So, next game I have is Wake Forest, Miami. I'll be real quick on this one because Miami was in a dogfight into the fourth quarter. There was 8 minutes left, and they were only up 20-14 against a 4-6, now 4-7 team. So, did not look good for this team to try to get into the playoffs, especially if they have a loss next week, which they have a really tough game against Syracuse. So they needed to show out. They end up showing out, getting a couple of turnovers to really make this score look a lot worse than it was. But no, I don't have faith in this defense. Their defense is very subpar. The offense can score. They're the number one offense in the country, and Cam Ward is very good. I'm not going to deny that. But then I also saw Cam Ward had another terrible interception, which he does that quite regularly. And that is something against good teams, which they have not played or beat yet. And so, that doesn't look good for them. They don't have a single top 25 win the entire year. They've lost to Georgia Tech and they've looked mediocre at times against several subpar teams. So, to say this team is a playoff team is kind of a reach, but if they win the ACC, you cannot deny them because there's a guaranteed spot. So they will likely get to the ACC championship game if they win out. Actually, I'm not 100% sure. I didn't double check that scenario because I'm going to double check that on Wednesday because Wednesday's more of the preview show. But I know right now Clemson is ahead of them, but I think if Miami does tie them, that they go ahead of them. So Miami does need this win to be able to go to the ACC championship game. And SMU has already clinched their spot. So SMU is already in. It's just now between Clemson and Miami. Clemson has finished their ACC slot or their slate, and Miami plays Syracuse in the Carrier Dome next Saturday. So that'll be everything on the line there for them. So let's move on to as a Florida fan. This was, I said it last week on the show, like, there was a ton to gain from this game. If they beat Ole Miss, that they would have a huge advantage going forward as far as recruiting, as far as like the backing of Napier into next year, as far as DJ Lagway and his confidence and like building into 2025. They were left for dead a couple weeks ago. We all were saying that Billy should be fired. It was rough and it didn't look good. The defense was subpar. And, the defenses still gave up a decent amount of yards the last two games. But what they've done, more importantly, is gotten key stops, especially fourth downs, particularly in this game when Ole Miss was driving and had the opportunity to put up points and Florida stopped them dead in the tracks. And, it's remarkable. This Florida team, was left for dead. And now they have won 2 straight against top 25 teams. And Ole Miss, I believe, was top 10 coming into this game. And, Lagway didn't have huge stats, but they just did the things necessary to win, forced Jackson Dart into mistakes. They had 2 interceptions late in the game to seal it. And then the fumble on the special teams that led to 3 points. So, you got to tip your hat to Billy Napier in Florida here. Like they did everything that they could to win this game, and they did it. The crowd was amazing. They Jaden Baugh had an excellent game. The defense, God, Cam Jackson and Banks just monsters inside. The DTs just destroyed the offensive lineman for Ole Miss, and were in the backfield the entire time, just causing havoc. And, there was no run game at all for Ole Miss except for Jackson Dart because they had to rely on him on QB runs when the play broke down. And that was it. There was like no other really run game to be even spoken of. I don't even think I'm curious how many times they ran the ball. outside of Dart. Yeah, they ran the ball like 20 times and it was like maybe 60 yards. And, this team, it is quite amazing to see this team go from 1-2 and 4-5 to now 6-5, bowl eligible, and with a shot at one, beating their rival next week to be 7-5, and then two, if they win the bowl game, they would be 8-5. I really don't think anyone would have saw 8-5 after starting 1-2 and then losing to both Tennessee and Georgia, and then getting smoked by Texas. This team has gone through a lot, and it is amazing. Like I am very proud of these guys. Like to see how hard they're working. Like the tackling, man, the tackling is like night and day. It is so impressive to watch. Tackles behind the line of scrimmage, open field tackles where it's just man on man, and they make the play because the last 4 or 5 years with Todd Grantham and Patrick Toney and just the struggle of defense for feels like forever, because the longest time Florida's defense has been really good, and since uh Dan Mullen, it was like falling apart. The defense has been bad like since 2019 basically, because 2019 was seeing like glimpses of it being bad, and then 2020 was like terrible, and then from there it's just been like mediocre at best, and it's been tough to watch. I mean, I even in the Texas A&M game this year, I remember like watching the game and just being so frustrated. I couldn't watch it because they couldn't make stops, they couldn't get off the field, and this team, like as much as they still allow teams to move the ball a little bit, they've limited so far the last two games big explosive plays outside of a couple for Ole Miss, specifically that long touchdown to Harris, and then like maybe another one or two really big plays. But like LSU, there wasn't really any big plays. They kind of dinked and dunked down the field to be able to move the ball. And like, Florida, hats off to them, man. And I'm, like Billy, like I said, we all thought he was done. We thought it was over. And, there was nothing but looking at coaches, and everyone had Lane Kiffin and Signetti. And now, I don't know if Signetti's off for sure, but Lane getting beat by Billy Napier is not a good sign for people going to hire him. Like, why would the administration go and hire someone that got beat by the guy you fired? That would be really ridiculous. Stranger things have happened, but I think that pretty much eliminates Lane for the future. And now this solidifies Billy for next year. And, this is the same schedule for next year outside of USF replacing UCF. And I think the like Samford game is going to be like another FCS school. But no, this a lot to play for. FSU is a rival, and you got to win this game, and I think they will. We'll talk about that more on Wednesday. But hats off to them. Proud of these guys. It was a huge game. I know Ian said as far as college football this week, what did he say? Just say that college football needs an Alka-Seltzer for the hangover because it was drunk on Saturday. Yeah, it really was. It was a really like wild Saturday. Especially with this upset by Florida over Ole Miss, and I'm grateful for wins like this because it like it's been so few and far between the last several years outside of 2020, and that's the last thing I want to bring up before I go on to the next game. But if Florida goes 8-5, they will have as many victories as that team in 2020. And that team in 2020 was seen as probably one of the best teams that Florida's ever had, and definitely one of the best teams since like the 08, 09 teams. And like to have as many victories as them is a huge, huge accomplishment, because I don't think anybody would have thought that throughout the year. They thought it was going to be like at best like a 5-7 team, maybe even 4-8, and they were flirting with it, but then they were totally redeemed themselves, like I always say. But hats off to them. I keep saying that, but yeah, good work for Florida. Okay, moving on to SMU, Virginia. SMU looked really good in this one. Kevin Jennings moved the ball quite well. He was very elusive. Even though he got pressured, he was able to evade the rush and make plays, both with his legs and his arm. And they were ahead at one point, I believe 24-0. Virginia scores late, and then SMU gets a late TD. This SMU team, I don't think a lot of people realize how good they are because they haven't had a marquee game. They didn't play Clemson and they didn't play Miami. They did play Louisville and they beat them. Their only loss so far is against a really good BYU team. So they look really dangerous. Like their offense is really in tune. They're very high powered. A lot of playmakers all around the field. And Jennings is a maestro back there. He did have an interception, but it didn't end up hurting them that bad. Yeah, so this is a team to look out for playoff-wise because I believe they're already into the ACC championship game. If they win next week, and I think if they win next week, and if they, depending on if I think it's Cal they're playing, if they, regardless of the result in the ACC championship game, I feel like they're going to go to the playoff with 2 losses because it would be one loss would be against right now 2-loss SMU or BYU team, and then the other loss would be against either a 2-loss Clemson team or a 1-loss Miami team, depending obviously the next 2 weeks. But so those would be 2 really good losses. I know they don't have a ton of really good victories outside of Louisville, so it would be kind of tough. But depending on that ACC championship game, if they look good in it, regardless of the result, they should get in. I feel like they should. I think they deserve it. I think their ranking just kind of is because they haven't played anyone too tough outside of the Louisville game. So it's tough to really weight them right now. They'll get that game in the ACC championship game, so that will be able to help us determine how good they are. And and I think they'll be able to score regardless of who they play. I know Clemson has a good defense, but Miami doesn't have a good defense, so SMU could put up a ton of points. And but again, how good is SMU's defense? It's good, but is it? They were in a bit of a track meet against Louisville. I think they would probably be in a track meet with Miami. I think they're probably better than Clemson because they could probably hold Clemson in check a bit. But again, SMU, I think they're better than Clemson, but probably it would be a track meet against Miami. That's all I'm going to say on that. All right, moving on to Kentucky, Texas. I think I saw that the main takeaway from this is that Quinn Ewers had an MRI on his ankle. I'm not for sure. I didn't see it anywhere else after that today when I saw it, and it may just been something on Twitter that just gets ignored. But that's what I saw, and I'm just curious. I'm like, okay, so is he going to be out? But I don't know for sure. And then it was also the people that were subtweeting it were FSU fans. So I don't really put too much credence in FSU fans because they're just butthurt from last year. But regardless, Texas was pretty in control of this game. Kentucky was not really doing much offensively. And then Kentucky got a scoop and score off of a Quinn Ewers fumble that made it a 24-14 game. So it looked really close. Texas gets a late score to make it 31-14, make it 3 scores. But again, this Kentucky defense has always been kind of tricky for some teams. I think it's a cover 3 matchup zone. I think that's what they play. I can't remember for sure, but they for whatever reason, Texas was playing more short stuff, more like screens and gashing them with the runs. which, they got a ton of yards on the ground. It was because it was 190 something through the air and 250 on the ground. Yeah, and then Kentucky only had 232 total yards. So this game was pretty lopsided. And outside of the turnovers for Texas, because it was getting a little kind of sloppy there in the second half for Texas. There was even like a second fumble loss, and then there was like I think a potential fumble on a special teams punt return, and it could have gotten out of hand a little bit, but Texas really, they proved that they're a better team than Kentucky. And, it's funny because like you look at the result that Kentucky had, where Kentucky got smoked by Florida worse than the score that Texas beat them by. And then Texas, smoked Florida pretty badly. Again, Florida was playing their backup. In this one, Vandergriff was out by like the third quarter. So I don't know what happened to him. I just saw like the 12-minute recap. It didn't really say what happened to him. I don't know if he got benched, but the backup came in and he had like one real long pass, but like everything else didn't look too great. No, Texas, I still think is one of the better teams in the country. Yes, they lost to Georgia in some of these games. They haven't looked amazing, but I really like the way they looked against Michigan on the road, and I like the way that they I'm trying to think what other game that they looked really good in. I guess that's really like the only one was the Michigan game that I can think of that they looked really good at. There's been some others that they've looked decent, but they haven't played. So they have avoided LSU, Alabama, Ole Miss, Tennessee. So they will get those in the not next year, but the year after that cycle. They do have Texas A&M coming up, so that'll be a big game. And if they get that victory, it'll look a lot better. I think even if they lose to Texas A&M, which would mean they won't go to the SEC championship game, I think they would go to the playoffs. So literally, even if they beat Texas A&M and then they lose to Georgia, I think they get in. If they lose to Texas A&M, I think they get in. And if they win out, obviously they get in. So I think at this point, they're basically a lock to get in. They only have one loss. There's very few teams in the country that have one loss or less. And also they have a shot at the SEC championship game. So let's move on to Penn State, Minnesota. This is a close one. Penn State wins 26-25. They bleed out the clock at the end to take home the victory, but Minnesota was right there with them for like the entire way. Minnesota went up 7-0, and then Alar hit a deep pass. Actually, they were down 10-0. Alar hit a deep pass for a touchdown. They get an interception of Minnesota, and then Penn State gets a field goal from that. And then they get a block punt that leads to a flea flicker TD. And then Alar gets a touchdown. The PAT is blocked, and it's turned into a 2-point conversion. He ran it all the way back, so you get 2 points for returning a blocked PAT into the end zone. Instead of a touchdown, it's 2 points. And then Minnesota gets a field goal. It's 22-16. And then Penn State gets another touchdown, 23-22. A fumble loss by Minnesota leads to Penn State field goal, 26-22. Field goal by Minnesota, 26-25. And that was it. So it was like back and forth, really tight. And that's honestly how Minnesota has played almost the entire year. They've played really close games. North Carolina, first game of the year. They beat USC on like a crazy end of game play with like a minute left on a 4th down conversion at like the half-yard line. They beat UCLA in a 1-score game, just kind of living on the edge. They don't have the most explosive offense, but they are effective and do little things right enough to be able to put them in position to win some of these games, and which they did. And I'm impressed with Minnesota because, I was just assuming they weren't, that good of a team. I was like, oh yeah, they're like whatever. Like, and I didn't even think too much about this game and didn't even really like look into it as much. And I'm sorry about that because I just, overlooked them, but they obviously came to play. And I think this Penn State team, which a lot of people realize is they're not as good as their record shows because the only good team that they played so far this year, Ohio State, they got beat. And I don't think that they're good enough to play like Texas or Georgia or like, Tennessee, maybe even, or even some of the better Big 12 teams. I think they would lose to a lot of those teams. And, they would probably lose to Oregon, so like they're like essentially they're what they've been for the last like 10 years. They've been a team that's like on the verge, on the doorstep, but they're just not good enough. But, James Franklin is granted this huge gift where now he'll be in the playoffs in perpetuity because, he doesn't have to be better than those good teams. He just has to be good enough to get into the playoff. And I don't think that's going to matter because I don't think they're going to be able to win a game or two to be able to really even challenge some of these higher end teams. So, they might get in and they might get a home playoff game and they might win that. That's a huge environment, huge advantage. Beaver Stadium at night with a huge crowd and just going crazy for a playoff game. But I just don't think they're good enough to win neutral site games against very good teams. And it's going to continue. They're just not good enough. That's just what it is. Okay. Moving on to huge game, BYU, Arizona State. At the time, BYU was 9-1. Arizona State was 8-2. I really wish I could have watched this game. I had too much stuff going on Saturday. But no, huge game. And Arizona State goes up 21-0 in like the drop of a dime. Like it was like Scatterboo was all over them. Like they could not tackle him. He was just breaking off huge runs. I think he had 4 total touchdowns. Just a monster game from him. 3 TDs, sorry, and 147 yards. Sam Levitt had a really good game. And Retzlaff had a good game outside of the 2 picks, but those 2 picks were pretty instrumental in Arizona State's victory. So, BYU just, I don't know. It's crazy, man. They were like chugging along, had some good victories. They were like, they beat Kansas State, they beat SMU, and it was like, oh, looking really good. And they look like a complete team. They can like score a ton of non-offensive touchdowns with both special teams and defense. And the offense is competent enough to move the ball. And Retzlaff is, pretty adequate with the option and what they do with their offense. But, they cannot, for whatever reason, win these close games the last 2 weeks. And, they beat Utah very close and they beat Oklahoma State close. So they're like, now they're almost like just playing down to their competition a bit. But this is not playing down because this is a good team. They just been in this mode of like, playing close games. So now, with a better team, the better team is going to come and win this game. And, they do. And they come out and win. And like, Kansas got them the week before. And now it's like they're on the outside looking in. As far as the Big 12 goes, it is Arizona State and Iowa State right now if we ended today. So we still have next week to decide. Both Colorado and BYU have 2 conference losses. So they're still in the mix. I think we'll break down the scenarios on Wednesday, but definitely a lot going on there. This game was close near the end because BYU was down 21-0, like I said, but then they came back. They got it to 28-23. They had the ball late and then couldn't get a score. And then Arizona State was trying to run out the ball. And they did like one of those plays where the quarterback just throws the ball up in the air and hope that the clock expires, but it didn't. They had a second left. So Retzlaff had a last second throw and he couldn't convert. It's funny, like BYU was getting these like jet sweeps to really get their touchdowns on once they got closer in the red zone. So that was a very effective, and like their offense is good enough. And I think the defense, got beat early, but then they started coming back there and making enough plays to keep them in there because Sam Levitt had an interception as well. Just a good overall game. I'm glad to see Arizona State back in the mix for stuff because that's kind of like a fun team and like a fun program to see come back because they were huge in the 90s, and then they've had some brief periods where they've been good. Lately have been a struggle, but they have talent. Ricky Purcell and now Elijah Badger coming from Arizona State, and then Johnny Wilson as well that went to Florida State from Arizona State. They have NFL talent on that roster. Rashad White, Jaden Daniels, like they've had a ton of talent there. They just have not been able to put stuff together. But now seems like Kenny Dillingham really knows what he's doing. So it's good for him, and it's good to see their success there. Okay, moving on to Colorado, Kansas. I called it. I'm not going to lie. Like, I definitely did my research on this one. I felt like Colorado could lose it, and then I tried to back it up with what information I could find from it. And that information was the fact that Kansas was in a ton of close games throughout their like losses that they suffered. So they had like 4 or 5 losses where it was like 6 points or less, and they were definitely not a true image of what their record show. They were better than their record show, and they are good. They proved it in this game, and then not only that, then conversely, Colorado, their victories were against much worse teams than the top end of the Big 12, and that's where I knew there was an issue because I was like, okay, the only top end team they played in the Big 12 was Kansas State, and they lost. And then they didn't play BYU, they didn't play Iowa State, and they didn't play Arizona State. So like they kind of skirted by that, and they were able to feast on some of these bad teams. And you know what? That's the other thing is like not only these teams are bad at the bottom end of the Big 12, but they had worse quarterback play. And I knew Jalen Daniels, he's good. Like I don't know how many people know him, like outside of like some people that follow Big 12, but the kid is pretty solid. He's really elusive. He makes plays with his legs and, accurate enough with his arm. And, and then add on to it, then this game, Devin Neal went off. The kid had like nearly 300 total yards, 4 TDs. The kid was a monster. He was just getting open all day and just breaking away from people. He's super fast. I didn't even know Devin Neal before this game, and he just obliterated the Colorado defense. And the Colorado defense is not good. I knew that coming in, and that was the other thing. It's like their defense is not that good. They've been like having a high ranking because they're playing terrible teams. So it's like it's a little inflated that way. But yeah, Kansas gets the job done. They were in control. They were up 17-0 at one point. They went up 20-10. They were up 23-14 at half, and then coasted to 37-21 victory. So hats off to them. They're on the verge of getting bowl eligibility. They just beat BYU. They're making the most of their season considering all the losses that they racked up early. And Colorado now was in the driver's seat to the Big 12 championship game and potentially a playoff spot. As a 3-loss Big 12 team, I don't see it if they don't go to the Big 12 championship game. And it's going to be kind of difficult to get there. So we'll see. It's not out of the realm of possibility that they still go. But I think even if they go, I don't think they would win if they played Arizona State or Iowa State or BYU. I think they would lose to any of those 3 teams. Okay. Moving on to Tulsa, USF. This was a butt whooping. I mean, this was like a can of it because USF wins 63-30. They were up at one point. I think it was 49-7 or something. Yeah, it was 49-7. And just, I mean, they were running right through them. I don't know what their total rush yards is off the top of my head. Let me look. Kelly Joyner at 131 yards. 715 total yards. That is ridiculous. 715. That might be the most ever. I don't know what the highest USF has ever had, but that's pretty high up there. 407 passing yards. That is crazy. I didn't get to watch the game because most of these USF games are on ESPN Plus, and I don't have it, and I don't really feel like giving money to ESPN. I should if I'm going to cover USF, but it's also tough because like I had stuff going on, so I wasn't able to really like watch it anyways. I wish I could just if I had ESPN Plus, I wish I could record it, but I don't think that's even possible. But Bryce Archie looked really good, 21 to 31, 305 yards. You know, this USF team has a really good shot at getting to respectability next year and to really start to turn the corner like to a top tier program, a top G5 team. And I think they can. I think the recruiting is amazing. Like even today, I think Coach Alex Golish got like 3 or 4 recruits. Just I was watching on Twitter and like or X, and then he would just boom, boom, and like constantly posting that he's getting recruits. So it looked really good. They've had the like top G5 class for the last little bit last year and most of this year. So if they continue that trend, they'll be able to build on that. And, you know, I think they're going to be a really good team next year. Their schedule is not crazy difficult like this year because they had Alabama, Miami this year. Next year, I think they only have Florida, and I don't think there's another like tough non-con, but the conference schedule doesn't look too crazy tough. So USF, huge victory, bowl eligible, just like Florida. So hats off to them again. You know, I'm loving this team getting into respectability again. It's nice to see the team that went from, 2020, 21, 22, winning only 4 games to now last 2 years, 23 and 24, winning 7+ games, hopefully 6+ games right now, and getting bowl games. And so it is a huge difference, from only winning 1 game 2 years ago to now both years winning 6+ games. It is a blessing, and I'm glad that we get to watch it. And I'm glad that the team is doing so well. I'm glad the offense is amazing to watch. And, it seems to be, changing the entire like program and the athletic program. And considering what happened to Coach AAR, it's been tough, and then the Hurricanes, it's been a tough little bit for USF fans. So it's enjoyable to see this. And then also today, USF basketball won at the last second. Reed hit that a jumper in the corner. So they got 3rd place in the that tournament they're in. So good to see USF winning, and hopefully it continues. Let's move on to this is such a shame. Army, Notre Dame. I really thought Army was going to play a much better game. I did not expect this. I didn't get to watch the whole thing as well. Like I said, I was busy with stuff. But Bryson Daly had a ton of yards on the ground, but Jeremiah Love for Notre Dame was huge. He only had 7 carries, but 130 yards and 2 TDs. And Riley Leonard was really good, even only threw the ball 13 times. It was a block punt. I gave him a short field on one of them. I know Daly had at least 1 fumble that Notre Dame recovered. And yeah, so there was a couple mistakes by Army that really kind of prevented anything. But Notre Dame was just effective and efficient. They scored on their drives. They were quick plays. And Army had the ball for 39 minutes to Notre Dame's 20. That's why time of possession is highly overrated, because if you have the ball forever, it doesn't necessarily mean you're doing well. They were able to move the ball, but they weren't able to get a ton of points. Notre Dame wins 49-14. And, hats off to Army. It's a great year. I think that, depending on what they do the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks with the Army-Navy game, and then the AAC championship game. It's still a great year. Playoffs is probably highly likely unless maybe Boise State loses, maybe, but it would be like very slim. But it's been a great year, and they just got to win out these last two, and it's would be an amazing year. And maybe they get a really good bowl game outside of the playoff, which would be pretty cool because they haven't had a really big bowl game in like forever. Okay, speaking of Boise State barely hangs on 17-13 against Wyoming. This is kind of back and forth. Boise scores late, but Genty, just really what I want to focus on, had another huge run, 169 yards on the ground and a TD. Great game for him. And they move on. They have their game? I believe it is. Who did they play? Oregon State, which will be a tough one because Oregon State beat Washington State last week or this week. So, and then they play in the Mountain West Championship. So Boise State still has a lot to play for. So they need to win these games to be able to get in the playoff. I think they can. I think Genty is good enough to be able to keep them in games in a playoff, but I don't think they're going to be able to win a game. They might get a home playoff game, which would be a huge advantage because it would be cold, but I don't think they're going to get a home playoff game. I think they're going to be like the 12 seed, but I can't remember what that last conference winner gets because it's the 4 best conference winners get a first round bye, and then the 5th conference winner. I don't know if it's guaranteed in that 5 spot. I don't think it is. So they could go. I think they could go like the 12th spot. So they would have like the hardest road. Okay. Alabama, Oklahoma, just embarrassing. Alabama loses to this like average Oklahoma team that, didn't seem to be doing very well, just a rough year for Oklahoma, and Alabama just looked like crap, and they lose 24-3, and this season is not over for them because they still can beat Auburn, but they're not going to the SEC championship game, which they were almost like pretty much not a significant lock, but like 74% chance to go, and they lose, and then now they have to hope and pray that they can get in. Crazy things have happened. I know we talked about earlier. There's a chance they could, but we'll see. But Oklahoma forces a bunch of turnovers by Alabama. 3 interceptions by Milroe. Not good. I saw a lot of people making fun of him. It is what it is. When you talk a lot of trash, prepare to get talked back to if you lose, which they did here. Texas A&M, Auburn, crazy game back and forth. Auburn was up. No, they weren't up. Sorry. Texas A&M was up. And then, oh no, it is. God, I knew it. I'm looking at this weird because they have like, they don't have the totals from the first and second quarter. I thought so. Like, I'm almost positive Auburn was up like 21-0 or something like that to start the game. They have like just the third quarter, fourth quarter overtime. They don't have this first and second quarter. But yeah, Auburn was up early, and then Marcel Reed played really well for Texas A&M, got them back in the game. He had 297 yards. Peyton Thorne played really well, had 301. They both threw a pick. Jacquez Hunter for Auburn had a really good game, 130 yards, 3 TDs. So Auburn gets the victory here in overtime. It goes to the 4th overtime. They're doing the 2-point conversions back and forth, and Auburn scores theirs, and then Texas A&M fails to score theirs. So A&M had everything to play for. If they win the game and beat Texas, they like almost assuredly go to the playoffs, regardless of what happens in the SEC championship game. Now it's like they have to keep winning. They have to beat Texas. They have to beat Georgia. And, a loss is definitely eliminating them. So they have to keep winning. This is basically now they're in playoff mode the rest of the year. And, I don't know if they're good enough. I think Marcel Reed is good. I think the team has talent around him, but I just don't know if they're like cohesive enough, especially after the last couple of years with Jimbo. Seemed like that team was kind of in disarray for a few years. But this A&M team had everything to play for. Coming into the game, Elko was saying, "Oh, we're prepared for Texas." Oh, sorry, I mean Auburn. So like even he let it slip, like Freudian slip, that they were preparing for Texas, and it's like, I know it probably wasn't just, it was just a slip, but it's still like, the Auburn people didn't appreciate that and they win. And, this is why, college football is as great as it is when a team like Auburn, who was 4-6 coming in this game, and Kansas was 4-6 against Colorado, and they were both 8-2, and they both get the victory. So anything can happen. This is why you don't take anything for granted. Okay, last couple of games, and then we'll get out of here. Iowa State, Utah. Iowa State gets the victory. I didn't get actually a chance to watch a recap on this one, but Isaac Wilson, 8 for 8, and like just they didn't pass the ball a ton, and Utah just struggling, and they Batari was in there as well for Utah, but just it's rough, man. Their offense is just not good, and granted, give it to Iowa State for being able to, put up enough points to beat them. Obviously, Utah's defense is very strong. They're one of the best defenses in the country, but offensively, they only put 224 yards. And, that's not good enough to win games, even though they were clearly in this game. But Iowa State was just a better team, and Iowa State gets a victory and now have a chance to get to the Big 12 championship game with a shot to get to the playoffs. So Iowa State, left for dead after that Texas Tech game, and now like have a real shot at like everything. So crazy, it's how quickly things change. It's week to week and things change rapidly. Last couple of games, Vanderbilt, LSU. LSU wins 24-17. Both these teams really eliminated, so not much there. Kansas State, Cincinnati, 41-15, Kansas State. Kansas State outside looking in with Big 12, so I was just seeing if there were going to be a lot more chaos, but there wasn't as much, so Kansas State's pretty much done. Last game, two teams that we cover, USC, UCLA. I almost went to this game, but instead I hung out with my buddy that I haven't seen in a while, so kind of glad I did that because it was low key. But no, USC, that fourth quarter, they just did enough to win, and like UCLA was winning 13-9 heading into the fourth, and USC gets a field goal in that late TD and just does enough to win. And like UCLA at times in this game looked good. They just couldn't really convert. And, Ethan Garbers looked better. He didn't have a pick in this game. TJ Harden looked good on the ground. Woody Marks looked pretty good. Kyron Hudson had a good game. Jaden Maivia, looked solid enough, and they get the win. And now it's like USC is bowl eligible and has a shot at beating Notre Dame next week and spoiling their rival's season. So, give it to USC for that, because that's quite amazing, because it's like, they struggled all year in these one-score games. They finally get another one here, and they get the win. So last 2 weeks, they beat Nebraska and they beat UCLA. So, USC kind of turning things around. If they win this next week, they're 7-6 or 7-5, and if they win the bowl game, they're 8-5. So, I think anyone would take 8-5, considering I think they were 4-5 like 2 weeks ago. So they have a real shot at it, and 3 teams that we cover are bowl eligible when we didn't think it was going to be possible, and now they've kind of turned things around, and it's good to see. I'm glad to see. I hate it for UCLA. I think they're building on stuff. I know it was the first year under Deshaun Foster, so maybe they can turn things around next year, which I think they will. I think Eric Bieniemy was like feeling things out the first couple of games, and he really started to turn it on later in the year, like midway through to the end. So I think next year they'll be clicking more on offense. Defense looks solid. So there's a lot to play for. They still have a game against Fresno State. They can get a win there to finish out the year on a high note. But that is it. That's the show. So we have 1 week to go. We've got the preview show on Wednesday, and then Sunday is the recap, and that's the end of the regular season. We'll still have conference championship games and all of the playoffs, but it's a lot more limited shows here on out because there's not as much information to convey to everybody. So this is basically the end of the heavy lift of the year, which is good on for me because then I don't have to spend 5-6 hours on Sundays watching so many games, but I love to do it. I love to be able to give you guys that information and break down these games. So that is the show. Find us on haterradio.com for all of our articles and some other stuff there. And then for socials, we're on Twitter, X, Instagram Threads, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook. You can find us on all of those. Just type in Hater Radio, it'll come right up. And that's the show. We'll talk to you Wednesday for the preview show. Tune in 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific every Sunday and Wednesday. All right, take care, y'all.